On the 26th of March, 2004, an astronaut aboard the International Space Station photographed a storm over the South Atlantic, about 1,000 kilometers off the coast of Brazil. It had a clean spiral. It had a hole in the middle. On the ground, Brazilian meteorologists looked at the same image and argued, not about where it was going, but about what to call it. Because according to everything they had been trained on, the thing in that photograph should not have been there at all.
The South Atlantic is the tropical ocean that does not make hurricanes. 3 reasons, and they stack on top of each other. The water south of the equator there runs cooler than its northern twin. The belt of thunderstorms that seeds tropical storms elsewhere, the intertropical convergence zone, rarely wanders far enough south to help. And above it all, the upper winds run fast and crosswise, shearing the top off a young storm before it can stand upright. Pull up a map of every cyclone track humanity has recorded, and the world lights up in tangled ribbons: the Caribbean, the Bay of Bengal, the Philippine Sea. Then look at the ocean between Brazil and Angola. It is blank. Not thin, blank. Which is why in March 2004, there was no hurricane warning center for that coastline, no list of names waiting in a drawer, no siren protocol, no evacuation category, no word in the local forecast vocabulary for what was turning slowly offshore. In the end, it was named by a newspaper. A Brazilian front page ran the words Furacão Catarina, Hurricane Catarina, after the state it was aimed at, and the name stuck because there was no official body with the authority to give it a different one. It came ashore on the night of the 28th, between Paso de Torres and Balneario Gaivota, a low stretch of sand and small beach houses, sustained winds around 100 miles an hour, a central pressure of 972 millibars, the lowest ever measured in that ocean. Roughly 1,500 homes destroyed, 40,000 damaged, 85% of the region's banana crops stripped off the stems. The death toll is usually given as somewhere between 3 and 11, and that range is itself the point. There was no machinery in place to count. Brazilian forecasters resisted the word hurricane. Miami applied it almost at once. 20 years on, the reanalysis papers still disagree about the number that should follow it. Here is the honest version, and it is more interesting than the clean one. Catarina did not begin as a tropical storm. It began as an ordinary mid-latitude low, the kind that crosses that coast every winter, and it converted, sitting over water that was warm enough, under upper winds that had gone unusually still, until it grew a warm core and an eye, and started behaving like something from the Caribbean. Some meteorologists read that as a technicality. Others read it as the entire story. Not a hurricane that wandered into the wrong ocean, but a wrong ocean storm that taught itself to be a hurricane. The reanalysis literature has landed anywhere from a nominal Category 1 to a Category 2. Brazil's Navy began formally naming systems in that basin in 2011, Anita, Arani, Iba, Acara, but none of them has come close to Catarina. It is still, more than 2 decades later, the only South Atlantic hurricane on record. Now, move to a different kind of impossible. A hurricane needs spin, and spin is borrowed from the Earth turning underneath it. That borrowing weakens as you approach the equator, and at the line itself, it falls to nothing. Textbook rule: no tropical cyclone forms within about 5 degrees of the equator. On the 26th of December 2001, one formed at 1.4 degrees north, 97 miles from the line, in the South China Sea. And the next afternoon it came ashore in Johor, 60 kilometers northeast of Singapore. It was called Vame. The Japanese agency logged it as a tropical storm at 85 kilometers an hour. The American Joint Warning Center, working from a Navy ship inside the system and a visible eye, called it a typhoon at 120. 5 people died in a landslide at Gunung Pulai. The researchers who studied it afterwards estimated that the exact conditions required might align somewhere between once a century and once every 400 years.
The Arabian Sea is a small, hostile basin. Dry air off 3 deserts, a monsoon that tears storms apart. It is not supposed to produce monsters. In June 2007, it produced Gonu, winds near 240 kilometers an hour, the strongest cyclone ever recorded there. It struck the eastern tip of Oman on the 6th, pushed a 5-meter surge inland at Ras Al Had, and then crossed into Iran the following day, the first tropical cyclone to reach that coast since 1898. 50 people died in Oman. The bill came to $4.4 billion, the worst disaster in the country's history. 8 years later, Chapala did something stranger. On the 3rd of November 2015, it made landfall near Mukalla in Yemen, the first hurricane-strength cyclone ever recorded to hit that country. Parts of the coast took 610 millimeters of rain in 48 hours. Those places normally receive under 50 millimeters in a year. The ground could not absorb any of it.
In October 2005, forecasters in Miami watched something small and tightly wound turn itself into a storm southeast of Madeira, over water at roughly 22 to 24 degrees. Tropical cyclones are not supposed to manage that below about 26.5. The discussion note written at the time is unusually plain about the discomfort. If it looks like a hurricane, it probably is, despite its environment and unusual location. It was named Vince. It reached hurricane strength, weakened fast, and came ashore near Huelva in southwestern Spain on the 11th, the first tropical cyclone on record to make landfall on the Iberian Peninsula. It killed nobody. It dropped welcome rain on a drought. The record deserves a footnote, though, and the National Hurricane Center gave it one. There are historical accounts of a storm striking the same coast in 1842 that may well have been stronger. First on record does not mean first. It means first since we started keeping the kind of record that counts.
You have seen the next one, even if you have never heard its name. On the 16th of October 2017, the sun over Britain turned a deep orange, then something closer to red, and the light on the streets went the color of old film. Photographs of it went everywhere. What produced it was a hurricane. Ophelia had reached Category 3 strength further east in the Atlantic than any major hurricane observed in the satellite era, then run north into cold water and cold air, shedding its tropical structure as it went. By the time it reached Ireland, it was no longer technically a hurricane, and it did not matter. Fastnet Rock recorded a gust of 191 kilometers an hour. Schools across the country closed. 3 people were killed, all by the wind's aftermath rather than the wind. On its eastern flank, it fanned wildfires across Portugal and Spain that killed roughly 49, and lifted their smoke with Saharan dust into the sky over London.
The Mediterranean grows its own version, small, warm chord, sometimes with a clean eye. Meteorologists call them metacanes and still argue about how tropical they truly are. In September 2023, one of them, Daniel, sat over central Greece and dropped 884 millimeters of rain on the village of Portaria in a matter of days. Then it crossed to Libya. 2 dams above the city of Derna, unmaintained since 2002, despite written warnings, failed in the dark on the 11th, sending roughly 30 million cubic meters of water down a wadi and through the middle of a sleeping city. The confirmed dead number at least 5,923. Credible estimates run far higher, and the disagreement has never been resolved. So, is the map changing? A 2014 study found the point of peak cyclone intensity drifting poleward at roughly 60 kilometers a decade. A 2025 analysis argues most of that drift tracks natural Pacific variability instead. Both papers are serious.
The honest answer is that we have only had good eyes on these oceans for about 50 years, and a hurricane in an empty sea before satellites simply never happened because nobody was there to write it down. Katerina is still the only one. One storm, one ocean, one photograph that a room full of trained people could not agree on. If you like the stories where the evidence is genuinely contested rather than tidied up, that is most of what happens on this channel. There is a new one every week, usually late.